Now, you blame the EU for failing to negotiate exemptions with Donald Trump. How would you do it differently?
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with Bloomberg. So actually, since November, everyone knew that the U.S. citizens have elected a president who would carry out a very patriotic kind of political strategy, including economic strategy. Everybody knew President Trump had tariffs in his toolkit. So it was obvious that at some point of time, this would come. And that's why we have encouraged the European Commission for a while to enter into negotiations with President Trump or with his team, his administration, about how to avoid a kind of trade war or a tariff war between European Union and US. And we had a concrete proposal, which we have put on the table of the Commission, which would have been the following. We all know that the backbone of both economies, US and the European economy, is the automotive industry. It is very sensitive what happens to the automotive industry because it has a huge impact on both continental economies. And we all knew that US used to implement and apply a 2.5% tariff on automotive imports from Europe, while European Union used to or has been applying a 10% tariff on the same. So 2.5 against 10. So we have proposed to the European Commission to make a unilateral step to decrease the tariffs on automotive imports from US to European Union to 2.5%. We would have been on an even level, and I do believe that would have meant a good platform to start negotiations from. We should have tried that, and I really regret that we did not.
Yeah. So, Minister, are you planning to talk to Trump on Europe's behalf? And I guess the question on the cars, although I don't want to spend too much time on this, is that we're just not importing enough U.S. cars. So even if the trade balance would still be there, even if you take away or get down some of the tariffs on them.
Well, I really do believe that even tariffs would have created a good platform for negotiations and would have shown goodwill. And this goodwill would have been able to lead to a different kind of situation compared to where we are now. Well, negotiating on behalf of the European Union, definitely we don't have the authorization for. It's the European Commission which should do it or should have done it. But I have to tell you that, regrettably enough, these kind of challenging times show very clearly that the institutions in Brussels are not able to lead. They are not able to come to solutions which would be beneficial for the European Union, for the European people. Unfortunately, this has been not the first crisis when these have been proved. That was the same with COVID, that was the same with migration, that has been the same with the war in Ukraine, that the European institutions simply are not able to lead and are not able to come to a right solution.
But, Minister, so are you open to bilateral negotiations with the US on these tariffs, or is it still the remit of the EU to handle this collectively? And how are you collaborating with them to try and mitigate some of the effects?
Well, you know that there are regulations in the European Union which make it very clearly that the policies on tariffs is a so-called community competence, so that comes with the European Commission. But we have been holding talks with the United States for a couple of months now about a special bilateral cooperation. You know, we are on very good terms with the Trump administration. We have been crossing fingers for President Trump to win the presidential elections, which he did, thanks God. So we are negotiating about a bilateral cooperation framework, which includes economic elements as well.
Minister, I mean, you know, to our surprise, he didn't give a better deal to Israel, who's some of his closest allies. So this looks like it's really hard numbers. Do you see these U.S. tariffs as part of a broader global trend of protectionism?
Well, I understand that, you know, President Trump has been carrying out a very patriotic kind of strategy, and economy is part of that. So he says America first. Everybody knew that he would apply such kind of measures as well. You know, the Israeli Prime Minister paid a visit to Hungary in the recent days. From Budapest, he flew directly to Washington, and I have talked to him a couple hours before he left Budapest, and he told me that he would have conversations with President Trump on that matter as well, which I understood he spoke about yesterday in the White House.
Yeah, you have a good relationship with the U.S., but at the same time, the U.S. partly blames corruption, the Hungarian public procurement in its official reasoning for the EU tariffs, right? So that's something that I think we need to remember. Does it make you disappointed in the U.S. in light of what, you know, President Trump has been saying?
Well, actually, thank you for raising this issue, because there have been fake news spread yesterday around this issue. So we are speaking about an annual report of the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative. This report has been written last year, because the deadline for the remarks expired in October, so well under the Biden administration, where we all know that the Biden administration looked at Hungary in a very hostile manner. We know that this report is being put together based on the substantial information provided by the U.S. embassies. It is written in the report. Right. And you know that the former U.S. ambassador under the Biden administration used to be a person who was very hostile to us. He was basically a political activist in Budapest. He was leading the Hungarian opposition, actually, commented domestic issues on a daily basis, criticizing the government 24/7. So actually, we see his sentences there. So we are pretty sure that the next report, which is going to be written by this administration already, will be totally different.
Minister, I also want to ask you about Chinese investments, because you welcome China, also their soft power influence. Is that a point of tension with the Trump administration?
Look, I have to tell you that I have been in this position for almost 11 years now. So I've been dealing with China and economic cooperation with China for 11 years. China is now a top investor in Hungary. 17 billion euros of investments, mostly in the automotive industry, are going on in Hungary by Chinese companies. 2020, 23, 24, in these 3 years, Chinese investors invested the most in Hungary. But I can tell you one thing for sure. Never ever they have confused any political issue with the investments. They have never put together any kind of political expectation to these investments.
So you don't have to choose?
No, actually not, because our strategy is very clear. This is the economic neutrality, which means that we are open for investments from the east and from the west as well. So if you look at the top 3 investors in Hungary, it's Germany, China, and the United States. One European, one American, and one Asian. So we are very, let's say, very balanced in this regard. And one more sentence, if you allow me, when it comes to Chinese investments. We are now becoming number 2 in the world when it comes to the production of electric batteries because of the Chinese investments. But why the Chinese investments have picked Hungary in Europe, why 44% of all Chinese investments heading Europe came to Hungary, is because of the Germans. And I tell you why, because besides Germany, we are the only country in Europe to be hosting all 3 German premium car makers. And they are all working together with Chinese suppliers. So if you look at Hungary, you see big German factories and big Chinese factories built next to each other.
Minister, I have many questions also on Russia.
Please.
I think you visited Russia at least 13 times since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, more than any other EU foreign minister. What is the purpose of such visits?
Well, I wish others had done the same, because I do understand that the only way out of this war comes through negotiations. And we are very thankful to President Trump that the current administration has started these negotiations finally, because this war does not have any kind of solution on the battlefield. That has been proved already. So if you don't have a solution on the battlefield, you must have a solution around the negotiating table. And thanks to President Trump, these negotiations have been going on. We have a very important cooperation with Russia when it comes to energy. Yeah. Why? Not because of political reasons, but because of physics and infrastructure. So we cannot cut ourselves from Russian energy sources, because physically speaking, we would not be able to supply the country. We are a landlocked one, so we depend on our neighbors. And since our neighbors have not made their infrastructural investments and projects, we are mostly dependent on sources from Russia. Russia has been a reliable partner so far when it comes to energy deliveries. No one gave us a better offer so far. No one gave us a more reliable and cheaper offer than offered by Russia. So obviously we are in connection with them. We are in a fair cooperation with them when it comes to energy, and we cannot give it up under the current circumstances.
And Minister, we don't really know exactly what happens next, but would you support the next renewal of EU sanctions on Russia when it comes due next year?
Well, first of all,
at the end of this year.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, I think that the policy of European Union based on sanctions has failed. Why? Because these sanctions have hit European economy more than the Russian economy. This is number 1. Number 2, of course, our decision will depend a lot about the, let's say, geopolitical circumstances. We see how successful U.S. and President Trump personally will be until the next decision, and we will, make our decision judging the actual circumstances at that time.
Minister, do you believe Russia really wants peace?
Well, I do hope that both parties at war want peace, but what I really know is that President Trump and his team is committed to make peace, and I think this is really great news. Secretary Rubio made it very clear at the end of last week during the NATO Foreign Ministerial that they don't give up their commitment. They are committed to make peace. They are committed to negotiate with both parties, and I think that the world has become a safer place in the last couple weeks just because of these negotiations. Because although we don't know whether peace is going to be made on a short term or medium range or long term, but what we know is that the risk of escalation of the war by the fact that the Russians and the Americans are in direct negotiations has been decreased. And this is good news for us, a country which has been in the neighborhood for 3 years of a war.
Minister, could you explain, I mean, Budapest has also tried to leave some sanctions on certain Russian individuals, for example, the sister of Usmanov.
Yeah.
What's the reason behind that?
Well, simply rationality and simply legal approach. So I think that these sanctions have been challenging the seriousness of the European Union as well. So if you put persons on a sanction list without any kind of real reasoning just because, then it ruins your seriousness. So we wanted to save the seriousness. So no, I think those are legally not based decisions, and those decisions which are legally not based we usually don't support.
Minister, maybe a final question
Yes.
on the rule of law and the International Court of Justice. You've often clashed with the European Union, Brussels, on issues such as migration and judicial reforms. With Hungary now, withdrawing from the ICC, does that deepen the divide with Europe?
Well, you know that we have been in office for 15 years now, and we are a very characteristically right-wing government, Christian Democrat, patriotic political strategy, sovereignist. And this is not something that would be digestible by the European Commission. So for the last 15 years, there are always political debates, because when it comes to big issues like the illegal migration or LGBT issues or the war itself, our approach is totally different than the approach of Brussels. So that's why we are under continuous attacks. But these attacks are being shown as if they were around the rule of law, which has nothing to do with the rule of law. Yeah, this is politics. This is politics. When it comes to
ICC,
on ICC it was on ICC there was a very concrete issue that actually ICC became a political institution or a political body, and a court cannot become a political body. And the fact that they issued a warrant on the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, that was a very clearly politically motivated step. And we don't want to be part of a so-called court which bases its operation on political basis. This is no-go for us. That's why we decided to leave.
But are you firmly committed to staying in the Union?
Of course. You mean European Union?
Yes.
No question, obviously.
There's no question. Like, there's not a point where you say actually
no. Of course, we look at ourselves as being members of the European Union in the future as well. Although we would like to reach some reforms in the European Union, because currently the competitiveness of European Union, the strength of European Union is very low. So we would like to improve the strength and the competitiveness of the European Union. There's a big debate, because many think that European Union should be a superstate, a federalistic superstate directed by and from Brussels. We see it differently. We think that the European Union should be an integration of strong countries, of strong member states, which are sticking to their history, their specificities, and so on, and so on, religion, and so on, and so on. And this is a big clash. So we see European Union in the future as a strong union based on strong member states. And here we differ when it comes to, the concept with Brussels.